there, my name is Sonya Elango. I'm a genetic counselor at Mount Sinai Beth Israel in New York City. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about the genetics of Parkinson's disease, including some related basic genetics concepts, information about 3 Parkinson's disease-related genes, and information about genetic testing. So let's get started. Parkinson's disease, or PD for short, is an extremely diverse condition. People with Parkinson's can have vastly different courses, ages of onset, and associated features. There's a saying, if you meet one person with Parkinson's disease, you've met one person with Parkinson's. There's a diversity of different symptoms and presentations in Parkinson's because we believe that there can be many different causes. In the majority of cases, we think that there are both environmental and genetic factors that play a role in the development of a person's PD. In a small number of cases, it appears that there is primarily a genetic cause. One way to visualize a person's risk to develop Parkinson's disease is as an empty jar that gets filled with marbles. So we all have a jar, and the blue marbles represent our genes, so what we're born with, and the green marbles are our environmental and lifestyle factors. Once the marbles pass a certain threshold, that's when a person will start developing Parkinson's disease. So there are a lot of different pathways to Parkinson's disease. In a small minority of cases, there is primarily a genetic cause for that person's PD, and that's visualized here by this jar filled all the way to the top with blue marbles. However, that's not really the typical scenario. Most people actually look like one of these 3 cases right here. So you can see here that there's some blue marbles, there's some genetic predisposition to varying extents for Parkinson's disease. But there are also green marbles involved. There are also different environmental and lifestyle factors that play a role in shaping whether or not a person is going to go on to develop PD. And conversely, the opposite is true. Just because someone is born with a genetic predisposition towards Parkinson's disease doesn't mean that they'll actually develop it. Our bodies are made up of billions and billions of different cells. We have all sorts of different kinds of cells. We have skin cells, brain cells, heart cells, plus many more. In general, each and every one of our cells contains a copy of our DNA, which is our genetic information. And this DNA is sectioned into what we call genes. So we have more than 20,000 genes in our body, and for the most part, we have 2 copies of every single gene, one from one parent and one from the other. These genes are kind of like instruction manuals. They tell our bodies how we're supposed to grow, develop, function, kind of do all the things we need to do. For example, we have genes that tell our bodies to make our eyes a certain color, make our hair a certain color, for our blood cells to carry oxygen around our bodies in a certain way. If we were to look at a gene up close, it would kind of look like a string of letters, the letters A, T, C, and G. Now, if we were to look at this, it kind of looks like gibberish to us, but our bodies are able to, well understand and follow these instructions. We're all born with changes in our genes. Most of these changes are harmless and really why we see such diversity we do between people. However, sometimes a change might actually stop a gene from working as it should. When this happens, the person with the change might start showing certain symptoms depending on what the gene does. Remember, we have 2 copies of most genes represented here by these 2 lines. If a person is carrying a change in one of these copies, during pregnancy they have a 50% chance of passing on the working copy and a 50% chance of passing on the non-working copy. There are some genes that have been found to be associated with Parkinson's, and there are likely others out there that are related to PD that we just don't know about at this point in time. 2 of the genes that we do know about are a little bit more common than the others, particularly in people of certain ethnic backgrounds. So these 2 genes are called LRRK2, which is spelled LRRK2, and GBA, which is spelled GBA. Most people with changes in these 2 genes will never actually develop PD. We'll actually be talking about a 3rd gene called Parkin that is associated with a type of Parkinson's disease that begins in adolescence or young adulthood. Every human is born with 2 copies of the LRRK2 gene. If you're born with a change in LRRK2, you most likely have about a 25 to 30% chance of developing Parkinson's. Why some people with LRRK2 changes go on to develop PD, whereas others don't, is the subject of a lot of research. Most likely, there are other genetic and environmental risk factors that, on top of these changes, play a role in the development of a person's PD. If you are of Eastern European, Jewish background, North African Berber, Basque, or Portuguese backgrounds, you're more likely to test positive for a change in LRRK2. However, we can see these changes in people of all ethnicities. Every human being has 2 copies of the GBA gene. If a person is born with a change in one of their copies, then they have about a 5 to 10% chance of developing Parkinson's disease. As with LRRK2, there are likely other genetic and environmental factors that play a role in the development of a person's PD on top of these changes in GBA. We can see changes in GBA in people of all ethnicities, but we are more likely to see them in people of Ashkenazi or Eastern European Jewish backgrounds. We have actually known about the GBA gene for quite some time because it's involved in a genetic condition called Gaucher disease. People with Gaucher disease have changes in both copies of the GBA gene and have symptoms including enlarged spleen and liver, anemia, and bone pain, among others. People with GBA-related Parkinson's typically have changes only one copy of the GBA gene, though rarely they might have changes in both. The last gene that we're going to highlight in this video is called Parkin. Parkin is a gene that is involved in many cases of young onset Parkinson's disease. People with Parkin-related PD often have symptoms beginning in adolescence or young adulthood, though they can rarely appear later on in life. So we all have 2 copies of the Parkin gene. If you're born with changes in both copies of your Parkin gene, then you're very likely to develop young onset Parkinson's disease. We can see changes in the Parkin gene in people of all ethnic backgrounds at similar frequencies. And there are actually 2 other genes related to young onset Parkinson's that we do know about, but Parkin is by far the most common. There are also other Parkinson's-related genes out there that are less common. While we are more likely to identify a change in a known Parkinson's disease-related gene in people of certain ethnic backgrounds with Parkinson's and in people with young onset Parkinson's, there's really a lot that we currently don't know. There's a lot of research being done specifically into LRRK2 and in GBA to see how common changes in these genes are in people of all ethnic backgrounds. There's also a lot of ongoing research being done into looking for new Parkinson's disease-related genes. So we've talked about Parkinson's disease genetics in general, as well as 3 of the more common genes that we do know about. So this leads us to genetic testing for Parkinson's disease. So good news, there is genetic testing available for some Parkinson's disease-related genes. The test itself is a simple blood test. From the blood sample, the lab uses technology to read all of these different Parkinson's-related genes, letter by letter, just like they were a book, looking for any changes that would stop them from working as they should. The decision to get genetic testing is a really personal one. Talking to a genetic counselor like myself can help you determine whether or not it's the right decision for you. In my experience, there are 3 main reasons why people with Parkinson's consider genetic testing. So there's knowledge, information about risk to other family members, and lastly, clinical trials. Many people naturally want to learn more about what caused their Parkinson's disease. While genetic testing might not always yield an answer, it can sometimes give us some more information. Knowing your own genetic status can always also give us some more information for risk to other family members to develop Parkinson's. Remember, we inherit our genes from our parents and we pass them on to our biological children. This can be a major reason why some people choose not to do genetic testing, as this can be difficult information to have. Lastly, we're finally at a point where we're starting to have clinical trials looking at new therapies that are specifically tailored for people with Parkinson's with changes in the GBA and LRRK2 genes. While not everyone wants to participate in a clinical trial, some people like having it as an option on the table for them. If you do not feel like genetic testing is for you, there are a number of different research projects studying the genetics of Parkinson's where you would not have to learn your genetic status. There are some useful resources and links to projects listed at the end of this video for you. Direct-to-consumer genetic testing for Parkinson's disease is available through 23andMe. This test looks at one specific change in the LRRK2 gene and one specific change in the GBA gene, so it would give us partial information about PD risk. Typically, the testing ordered by your doctor would look at the whole gene letter by letter, so it would give us information about additional changes in these genes. This testing would also look at additional genes other than LRRK2 and GBA. There are three types of results that genetic testing can yield. We can think of these three results as yes, no, and maybe. So a yes result is a positive result. It means that we were able to find a change in a gene that we know is related to Parkinson's disease. The no result, which is a negative result, means that we were not able to find changes in any of the genes that were tested. So this makes it unlikely that that person carries a change in any of the known Parkinson's-related genes, but technically they still could have a PD-related genetic change that could not be identified with the test. The third type of result is a maybe. So the technical term for the maybe is variant of unknown significance, or VUS for short. People with VUSs have changes that were found in a Parkinson's disease-related gene, but it's unclear whether or not the change is harmless or if it could actually lead to an increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease. People often have questions about whether or not doing genetic testing will impact their insurance coverage or ability to get insurance. So if a person already has Parkinson's disease, doing genetic testing isn't really going to change much in terms of insurance. We do get concerned about folks who are unaffected, who are getting genetic testing for Parkinson's disease. In these cases, there is protection against genetic discrimination by way of a federal law called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, which gives protection against genetic discrimination in cases of employment and in health insurance, but not in terms of life, long-term, and disability insurance. People who are unaffected, who are considering doing genetic testing for Parkinson's disease due to a family history, should really talk to a genetic counselor prior to making this decision. In summary, Parkinson's disease is a diverse condition with a number of different factors influencing a person's risk to develop it. Most cases, we believe, are caused by both environmental and genetic risk factors. We do know about changes in certain genes like LRRK2, GBA, and Parkin that are associated with an increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Deciding to learn your genetic status is a really personal decision. Talking to a genetic counselor can help you decide what makes the most sense for you and your family.